So one of the areas that is really interesting to me about this conversation about culture and leadership is mergers and acquisitions. There's so much history over the last 100 years of companies being acquired, merging. You see these huge organizations merging, and you also see a lot of companies that are in private equity or venture capitalism that are creating opportunities for companies to come together. This makes for overlapping cultures and a real challenge when you have two cultures that are very different. So how do we integrate this stuff? Through leadership. Well, I was just reading a Harvard Business Review article this week on leadership and culture. And it was really fascinating to me when they talked about the most important thing that's necessary in order for you to have an intentional culture, whether it's with the organization you're at right now or you're in an acquisition or a merger situation. And that is simply having the leadership team that is absolutely aligned to the mission, vision, values, and strategy of the organization. They have to live, especially, I think, the values of the organization, because the values are what guide our behaviors each and every day. The leaders have to walk the talk. If they don't do that, boy, employees just have this intuition about the leadership bullshit factor. And they know when the leaders are either aligned with those values or not aligned. And when they're not aligned at the leadership level, people feel it, they see it, and they get confused. So when I talk about culture and leadership, it starts with the individuals aligning with the values of the organization. And then when you have the complexity of an acquisition or a merger, well, you might have two sets of values. You might have two different cultures. Maybe they're somewhat similar. But the fact is that the leaders within those two organizations have to come together. And along the way, they have to decide what's most important for the values of the company. After that, they have to determine what the values of the company are going to be so that they can get aligned with the mission, vision, and values across the whole organization, then tie into a strategy. Now, I want to make one point about this with strategy that I've come across recently with a couple of different companies, because I've got these two companies that I'm working with two very, very different strategies about culture. The first company, through organic growth, is expanding across the Southeast United States over the last 30 or 40 years, very deliberately going into city after city, and they're growing organically. They're just identifying a city. They go into that city. They start with a small piece of the organization and they grow. It's an organic growth strategy. And the culture across that entire company is exactly the same. They expect people to behave in a way that's consistent with the overall culture. And the work that I've done with them for a decade and a half, I've talked to executives. There's two things that they talk about that they have to have in their culture. Just two things. Work hard and get along. If you do that, you've got a place with that company. If you have some level of competency, work hard, get along, and they grow. There's another company that I'm working with that's actually a public company, and they have a completely different strategy around this. Their growth strategy is through acquisition. And I have to admit, I have felt for many, many years in leadership that you have to have the same culture across the entire organization. Well, the CEO, he schooled me on this one. He really gave me some insight into why that is not necessarily holistically correct. Let me explain. So the second organization is taking a completely different cultural approach to this by maintaining a certain amount of the local cultural values. So they have some corporate values that they say are absolute, but then they're allowing the local companies to create one or two of their own values that's consistent with the companies that were acquired. It's a fascinating approach, and it works because the people that are being acquired feel like they still belong to an organization that's similar to what they were with before. So many times in mergers and acquisitions is we don't stay flexible with the way we approach leadership. And I think there's nothing more important than talking about leadership flexibility. And in fact, I'm going to go back to Situational Leadership by Ken Blanchard for just a second. There's a quote that he used to say that I agree with 100%, and he applies it to situational leadership. And I think we can apply it to culture. And the quote goes something like this: there's nothing so unequal as treating unequals equally. And I think if we understand how different these cultures can be and work within the flexibility of those local company cultures, they can be a lot more successful. And it works, and it's kind of fun to see.